The first time I saw my mother's name on the church bulletin, she had been gone for 11 years. It was folded inside a library book I almost donated, tucked between 2 pages like someone had hidden it there in a hurry. The paper was soft at the creases, yellow near the edges, and printed with the date of a Sunday I remembered for all the wrong reasons. That was the Sunday my father told me my mother had chosen to leave us. I stood in the hallway of my apartment with a box of old books at my feet, holding that bulletin under the weak afternoon light, and read the line again. Prayer request for Elaine Porter and her daughter, Claire. My mother's name was Elaine. My name is Claire. But at the time printed on that paper, my father had already told everyone she was gone, selfish, unreachable, and done being my mother. The strange part was not only that the bulletin had her name, it was that someone had circled it in blue pen. And underneath, in my father's handwriting, were 4 words that made my chest go cold. I should have answered. For a few seconds, I could not move. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and cardboard, and somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I remember hearing my own breathing, shallow and uneven, as if my body understood something before my mind could. I had spent most of my adult life believing my mother left because staying had become too hard. I had built a whole version of myself around that belief. I was 34 then, working as an assistant manager at a small insurance office outside Columbus. My life was ordinary in a way I had learned to appreciate. I paid bills on time. I kept my kitchen clean. I bought the same coffee every week. On Friday nights, I ate takeout in sweatpants and watched old home renovation shows because they made broken things seem fixable. People said I was calm. They did not know calm was something I practiced. My father, Martin, lived 40 minutes away in the same narrow brick house where I grew up. He was 71 by then, stubborn, neat, and proud in a quiet way. He still mowed his own lawn with a machine older than my first car. He still kept a jar of peppermint candies by the door. He still called every Sunday evening at 6, never at 5:58, never at 6:03. Our conversations were always practical. How's work? Fine. Car running okay? Yes. You eating enough? Dad, I'm 34. That doesn't answer the question. We loved each other, but we did not reach for difficult things. In our family, pain was treated like a drawer that stuck. You knew it was there. You pulled gently once or twice. If it didn't open, you left it alone. My mother was the drawer we never opened. When I was 13, she disappeared from my life without a goodbye. That was how my father told it. He said she had packed 2 bags while I was at school, left her key on the kitchen table, and walked out because she wanted a life that did not include a sick marriage, a quiet town, or a daughter who needed too much. He never said it cruelly. That made it worse. He said it with exhaustion. She was unhappy, Claire. That was the sentence he gave me, and for years I carried it like a fact. I remembered my mother differently, at least at first. She had smelled like lavender lotion and rain. She sang quietly when she folded towels. She never cut my sandwiches in triangles because she said squares were stronger. On winter mornings, she warmed my socks over the floor vent before school. But memories are not strong when adults keep correcting them. After she left, my father removed her from the house slowly. Not all at once. Her coat vanished first. Then the framed photo by the stairs. Then her blue mug. Then the floral scarf she used to tie around her hair when she cleaned. By the end of that year, it felt like my mother had not left the house. It felt like the house had swallowed her. I asked questions at first. Did she call? No. Did she write? No. Does she know about my science fair? He looked at the sink when I asked that one. I'm sure she knows you're doing fine. That was not an answer, but I was 13. I did not yet understand how often adults use soft sentences to hide hard truths. The church bulletin changed everything because it meant there had been a Sunday when someone asked our church to pray for us. Not for my father, for my mother and me. And my father had kept the paper. I sat on the floor beside the donation box and looked through the library book again. It was an old copy of Little Women, the one my mother used to read aloud when I had the flu. The spine had cracked in 3 places. On the inside cover, someone had written my name in my mother's careful script. For Claire, who asks the best questions. My throat tightened. I had not seen that handwriting in years. The bulletin must have been tucked inside the book for a long time. Maybe my father had hidden it there. Maybe my mother had. Maybe it had fallen from somewhere else and waited patiently between those pages until I became old enough to stop believing what I had been told. That evening, my father called at 6. I let it ring. Then, I let it ring again. When the voicemail notification appeared, I stared at it for almost 10 minutes before pressing play. Hey, Claire, just checking in. Call when you can. And don't forget, your registration renewal is due next month. His voice was ordinary. That was what hurt. I wanted him to sound guilty. I wanted him to sound afraid. But he sounded like a man reminding his daughter about paperwork. I called him back at 8:12. He answered after the first ring. You okay? I looked at the bulletin on my kitchen table. I had placed it beside a glass of water and had not touched the water once. Dad, why would Mom's name be in a church bulletin after she left? Silence. Not confusion, not surprise. Silence. The kind that already knows the question. What bulletin? He asked. I closed my eyes. Don't do that. He breathed in slowly. I heard the television in the background, a game show with bright applause that felt almost obscene. Claire? It says, prayer request for Elaine Porter and her daughter, Claire. It's dated October 14th. You told me she left October 10th. Another pause. Then he said, where did you find that? It was the wrong question. A child still living inside me stood up in that moment. Not the adult who paid bills. Not the woman who kept her voice steady at work when clients yelled. The child? The one who sat on the stairs waiting for a mother who never came back. In a book, I said. Why does it exist? He turned the television off. Some things were complicated back then. That is not an answer. I know. The softness in his voice frightened me more than anger would have. Did she leave? I asked. He did not answer. My hand tightened around the phone. Dad, did Mom leave us? She left the house. That's not what I asked. He exhaled, and in that exhale, I heard age, regret, and something I was not ready to call fear. She left the house, he repeated, but not the way you think. The room seemed to tilt. I sat down slowly. What does that mean? It means I should have told you more. You told me she didn't want me. I never said those words. No, you just built a life around them. He went quiet again. For years, his silence had felt like authority. That night, it felt like guilt. I need to see you, I said. It's late. I need to see you. He did not argue after that. I drove to his house in a rain that made every traffic light bleed red across the windshield. I remember gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my knuckles pale under passing street lamps. The church bulletin sat on the passenger seat inside a clear plastic sleeve because I was afraid the rain would somehow reach it and erase the only proof I had. My father opened the door before I knocked. He looked smaller than I expected. He wore a gray cardigan over a white t-shirt, and his hair was flattened on one side like he had been sitting with his head in his hand. The house smelled the same as always. Lemon cleaner, old wood, peppermint. For a second, I hated that. I hated that a house could keep its smell while changing the truth. He stepped aside. I walked in. Neither of us hugged. The kitchen was exactly as I remembered. Brown cabinets, white stove, a tiny clock shaped like a rooster above the pantry door. My mother used to hate that clock. She said it looked judgmental. I almost smiled, and then the feeling collapsed. My father sat at the table. I stayed standing. I placed the bulletin in front of him. He looked at it for a long time. His right hand moved toward the circled line, but stopped before touching it. "That was Pastor Jim's handwriting," he said. "Your handwriting is underneath." I know. "What does it mean?" He swallowed. "It means she called." The words landed so softly, I almost missed them. My ears rang. "What?" "Your mother called the church." I gripped the back of a chair. "When?" "A few days after she left." "After she left where?" His eyes lifted to mine. "After she left this house." I pulled the chair out and sat down because my legs no longer trusted me. "She didn't call us?" "She called the church office." "Why?" "She said she didn't know if I would pick up." The rain tapped against the kitchen window. My father looked at the glass, as if the answer might be written there. "She wanted to speak to you," he said. The child inside me went very still. "And did she?" His face changed. Not dramatically. My father was not a dramatic man. But something in his eyes loosened, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the parent who survived, but as a man who had failed and knew exactly where. "No," he said. I could barely breathe. "Why?" He rubbed both hands over his face. "Because I was angry." I let out a small sound that did not feel like mine. He kept talking, maybe because if he stopped, he would never start again. "She and I had been fighting for months. Longer than that, really. Money, my hours, her sadness, my pride. She wanted to move closer to her sister in Dayton for a while. She said she needed help. She said she was scared of how tired she felt." I stared at him. What kind of tired? He closed his eyes. The kind I didn't want to understand. There it was, the first crack in the story I had been handed. Not another man, not selfishness, not a mother who simply got bored and disappeared. Tiredness, fear, a woman asking for help. "She left to stay with Aunt Ruth?" I asked. He nodded once. Aunt Ruth had died when I was 21. I had met her only twice after my mother left. My father always said Ruth did not want to get involved. Maybe that had been another drawer he kept shut. "Mom was in Dayton? For a while?" "How long is a while?" He looked down. 6 months. The kitchen blurred. 6 months. "Claire, you told me you didn't know where she was." "I told you she was gone." "You lied." He flinched. "Yes." The plainness of it made me angrier. I wanted excuses. I wanted something to push against. Instead, he gave me the truth like a stone placed on the table. Why didn't she come back? I asked. He reached for the bulletin then, finally, and touched the circled prayer request. She tried. I stood so fast the chair scraped the floor. No. She did. No. Don't say that like it's just another fact. You don't get to tell me she tried after letting me believe for 21 years that she forgot me. My voice broke on the last word. My father's eyes filled, but he did not cry. I almost wished he would. Tears might have made him easier to hate. She sent letters, he said. The room went silent, except for the rain. My whole body went cold. What letters? He looked toward the hallway, and that was when I understood there was more. Every family has a place where it keeps what it cannot face. For some people, it is an attic. For some, a storage unit. In my father's house, it was the hall closet. The closet held winter coats, a vacuum, old umbrellas, board games with missing pieces, and a green metal lockbox I had seen my entire life but never opened. He used to say it held tax papers and insurance documents. He got up slowly. I followed him. His hands trembled as he took the lockbox from the top shelf. He carried it to the kitchen like it was heavier than metal. From a drawer, he removed a small key on a faded red string. I had seen that key before, hanging near the calendar when I was little. I had never wondered what it opened. He unlocked the box. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, some white, some pale blue, some with stamps, some returned, some never mailed, all addressed to me. Claire Porter. My knees weakened. I reached for the nearest envelope. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, the C slightly curled at the top, just like inside the book. The postmark read November 3rd, 11 years ago. My father whispered, "I'm sorry." But I was already opening it. "Dear Claire, I hope your father lets you read this. If he does, please know first that I did not leave because of you. I have never had a day in my life where I wanted less of you. I left because I was afraid of what I was becoming in that house, and I thought getting help would make me a better mother when I came back." I pressed the paper to my mouth. The words blurred. My father sat down across from me, but I could not look at him. I read another, then another. In each letter, my mother explained small things. The room she was staying in at Ruth's house, the neighbor's orange cat, the soup she learned to make, the therapist she was seeing at a community clinic, how she walked every morning because sitting still made her cry. And always, me. Did I still like strawberry cereal? Had I outgrown my purple jacket? Was I angry? Did I remember that squares were stronger than triangles? I made a sound then, half laugh, half sob, because that tiny detail broke something open in me. My father covered his face. I kept reading until the kitchen table looked like a paper storm. Then I found the letter dated March 19th. It was shorter than the others. "Dear Claire, I came by yesterday, but no one answered. I saw the daffodils coming up by the porch. You used to call them yellow trumpets. I stood there for a long time and wanted to knock again, but I was afraid of making things worse. Please ask your father if I can see you. Please, sweetheart. Even if you are angry, I need to hear your voice. I have made mistakes, but leaving you was never one of them. I am trying to come home the right way. Love, Mom." I looked up. "She came here." My father nodded. "I was home? You were at school. Did you know she came?" "Yes." "And you didn't tell me?" "No." The word sat between us like a closed door. My hands began shaking. "Why?" He stared at the table. "Because by then you were sleeping again. Eating again. You had stopped crying every night. So you decided I was better without her? I decided I couldn't watch you get hurt twice. No, you decided you couldn't admit you were wrong. That one reached him. His mouth tightened. His eyes lowered. Yes, he said. I hated him then. Not forever, not cleanly. But in that kitchen, with my mother's letters spread between us, I hated him with a child's old grief and an adult's new understanding. He had not only lied about my mother, he had let me become a person shaped by being unwanted. There are wounds that hurt because something happened, and there are wounds that hurt because something almost happened, but someone stood in the way. I had almost had my mother back. That almost became a second loss. I spent the next hour reading letters while my father sat across from me and aged in silence. He did not defend himself again. Maybe he knew there was no defense left that would not sound like another injury. Near the bottom of the box, I found a church envelope. Inside was a note from Pastor Jim, written to my father. Martin, Elaine called again. She asked whether Claire received the letters. I told her I could not answer that. Please consider letting them speak. Whatever happened between you and Elaine, the child should not carry the silence, the child. I was 34 years old, but those two words undid me. Under that note was the church bulletin, the same one I had found in the book, prayer request for Elaine Porter and her daughter Claire. Circled in blue. I should have answered. I looked at my father. Why did you keep it? He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. I don't know. Yes, you do. His jaw worked, because it was the first time I knew I had done something I couldn't undo. I leaned back, exhausted. What happened to her? He stared at me. I don't know everything. Tell me what you know. He nodded slowly. She stayed in Dayton for almost a year. Then Ruth got sick. Your mother took care of her. After Ruth died, Elaine moved to Cincinnati. She sent fewer letters. Then they stopped. Did you try to find her? No. The answer came too quickly. At least he did not dress it up. I gathered the letters into a stack. I'm taking these. They're yours? I looked at him sharply. They were always mine. He nodded, and for the first time that night, tears slid down his face. I know. I left without hugging him. He followed me to the porch, but he did not ask me to stay. The rain had softened into mist. The streetlights made the wet sidewalk shine like dark glass. As I walked to my car, he said my name. I turned. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. I loved you, he said. I held the lockbox against my chest. I know. That was the worst part. He had loved me. He had also hurt me. Both were true, and neither one canceled the other. For the next week, I barely went to work. I told my manager I had a family emergency, which was true in a way no form could explain. I sat on my living room floor with my mother's letters around me, reading them in order, building a map of a woman I had been taught to misunderstand. She was not perfect. That became clear. She had been depressed before anyone in our house used that word. She had felt trapped by bills, loneliness, and a husband who believed providing money was the same as providing comfort. She had left without explaining enough to me, thinking a short absence would be easier than a frightening truth. That choice hurt me, but she had tried to come back. That mattered. On Thursday, I drove to Dayton. Aunt Ruth's old house had been sold years earlier. I found it through county records and sat across the street for 20 minutes, staring at a white house with blue shutters and a plastic slide in the yard. A young father came outside, carrying a toddler on his hip. He kissed the top of the child's head without thinking. I cried so hard I had to pull away from the curb. My mother had once stood somewhere near that porch, writing letters, hoping my father would let me read them. The next day, I visited the church printed on the bulletin. It was smaller than I expected. A red brick building beside a dry cleaner and a dentist's office. The sign out front had missing plastic letters, so Sunday service looked like Sunday Serve CE. Inside, the hallway smelled like coffee and old hymnals. A woman at the office desk looked up from a stack of envelopes. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for records from a long time ago," I said. "Pastor Jim used to work here." Her expression softened. "Pastor Holloway, he retired years ago, passed away in 2019. Something in me sank. Oh. What kind of records? I showed her the bulletin. She adjusted her glasses and read it carefully. My mother's name was Elaine Porter, I said. I'm trying to find out what happened to her. The woman looked at the bulletin again, then at me. Give me a minute. She disappeared into a back room. I stood there listening to the muffled sounds of a copier, a phone ringing, a door closing. On the wall beside me were photos of church picnics and Christmas drives, people holding paper plates, children with frosting on their faces, old women smiling beside folding tables. Ordinary kindness, the kind people build quietly while other people are falling apart. When the woman returned, she carried a file folder. We don't have much, she said, but Pastor Holloway kept pastoral notes, not private counseling details, just contact records. She opened the folder. I saw my mother's name, Elaine Porter. Several dates. Several phone numbers crossed out. Then one line near the bottom. Moved to Cincinnati. Working at Northside Community Library. Asked again about daughter. My breath caught. Library. Of course. My mother had hidden the bulletin inside a book. Or maybe my father had. Either way, the clue had brought me back to her. The church secretary wrote down the name of the library and slid the paper across the desk. I don't know if she's still there, she said gently. Thank you. She touched the edge of the bulletin. Sometimes people leave traces because they hope someone will follow them. I drove to Cincinnati the next morning. Northside Community Library sat on a corner shaded by maple trees, with a bike rack out front and a mural of open books painted on the side wall. My hands shook so badly in the parking lot that I had to sit for several minutes before going in. Inside, a teenage boy argued softly with a printer. An older man slept in a chair near the magazines. A little girl whispered loudly to her grandmother that she wanted books with dragons, but not scary dragons. I walked to the front desk. A librarian with silver hair looked up. Hi there. I'm looking for someone who may have worked here years ago. Elaine Porter. The librarian's face changed. Not shock, recognition. You knew Elaine? My heart rose into my throat. She was my mother. The librarian placed one hand over her mouth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, very softly, Oh, honey. I gripped the desk. Is she alive? The question came out before I could protect myself from the answer. The librarian's eyes filled with sorrow. No. I'm sorry. She passed away 8 years ago. 8 years. 8 years ago, I had been 26. I had been living 2 hours away, buying cheap furniture for my first apartment, still believing my mother was somewhere in the world, choosing not to know me. What happened? I whispered. Cancer, she said. It was quick at the end, but she was here for years before that. She ran our children's reading hour. Children. The word hurt. The librarian came around the desk. My name is Margaret, she said. I was her friend. Friend. My mother had friends, a job, a voice people remembered, a life that continued without me, not because she did not want me, but because a locked box sat in my father's closet. Margaret led me to a small staff room and made tea I did not drink. She told me my mother had been gentle, funny when she felt safe, and stubborn about overdue fees for children. She used to say a child should never be punished for needing more time with a book, Margaret said. I laughed through tears. That sounds like her. Margaret watched me carefully. She talked about you. I closed my eyes. She did? All the time. I pressed a fist against my mouth. She kept your school picture in her wallet, the one with the blue background. I remembered that picture. 7th grade, crooked bangs, a denim jacket I thought made me look grown. She said you asked the best questions, Margaret added. The room folded inward. For Claire, who asks the best questions. She tried to contact me, I said. I know. I looked up. Margaret hesitated. She didn't tell everyone the details, but she said your father wouldn't allow it at first. Later, she said too much time had passed, and she was afraid you hated her. I did, I whispered. Margaret's face softened. I think she knew that was possible. She loved you anyway. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they opened another room of grief. Love that arrives too late is still love, but it has nowhere easy to go. Before I left, Margaret brought me to the children's section. On the wall was a faded paper tree. Each leaf had a child's name written on it, probably from some summer reading program years ago. Near the bottom, half covered by newer decorations, was a small green leaf. Claire. My mother had written my name there, not as a child who visited, as a child she carried. Margaret reached behind the desk and took out a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Elaine kept this in our staff cabinet, she said. She said it was for you if you ever came. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside the front cover, my mother had written one sentence. When you are ready, start with the truth that you were loved. I sat down right there on the carpet between the picture books and cried like I had not cried since I was 13. Not neatly, not quietly. A child nearby asked his grandmother why the lady was sad. The grandmother whispered, maybe she found something she lost. She was right, but what I found was not simple. I returned to my father's house 2 days later. He looked surprised when he opened the door. Older again, or maybe I was finally seeing him without the protection of habit. I found her, I said. His face tightened. He stepped back to let me in. We sat at the same kitchen table. I placed the copy of Charlotte's Web between us. She died 8 years ago. He closed his eyes. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he whispered, I wondered. That angered me more than if he had said he knew. You wondered? I searched her name once, years ago. I saw a library fundraiser page. Her picture was there. I closed it. Why? Because I was a coward. The answer was so bare that I had nowhere to put my rage. I opened the book and showed him my mother's note. His lips trembled as he read it. She loved me, I said. Yes. You knew that. Yes. You let me think she didn't. He nodded. I expected another apology, but instead he looked at the rooster clock above the pantry and said, After she left, you cried for 63 nights. I stared at him. I counted because I didn't know what else to do. You fell asleep on the floor outside our bedroom twice. You stopped eating breakfast. Your teacher called because you drew a picture of our house with no doors. His voice broke. I was angry at Elaine, but I was more afraid of what her leaving had done to you. When she called, all I could think was, if I let her back in and she leaves again, there won't be anything left of my little girl. I listened, not because it excused him, but because the truth deserved to be whole. So I made myself the good parent, he said, the steady one, the one who stayed. And after a while, I needed her to be the one who left. If she wasn't the villain, I didn't know what I was. I looked at his hands. They were folded tightly together. He had built my childhood out of protection and punishment, and somehow convinced himself they were the same. You were my father, I said. You didn't have the right to use my pain to hide yours. I know. You stole her from me. A tear fell onto his wrist. I know. And you stole me from her. That was the sentence that broke him. He bent forward, covering his face, and made a sound I had never heard from him. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken enough that I knew he had finally reached the place where excuses could not follow. I did not comfort him. That was my first act of honesty. Sometimes dignity begins when you stop taking care of the person who hurt you before you have taken care of yourself. A month passed before I saw him again. During that month, I read every letter. I visited my mother's grave in a small cemetery outside Cincinnati. Her headstone was simple. Elaine Marie Porter, beloved friend, reader, and mother. I knelt in the grass and placed the church bulletin beside the stone, weighted under a small smooth rock. I came late, I said. The wind moved through the trees. I wanted a sign, a bird, a sudden warmth, something gentle and cinematic. Nothing happened. The world stayed ordinary. A truck passed on the road beyond the cemetery. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower started. My knees hurt from the damp grass. And still, something inside me shifted. Not healed, just turned slightly toward air. I told her about my apartment, my job, how I still hated mushrooms, how I'd learned to make chicken soup, but never as good as hers. I told her I had believed the wrong story because I was a child and children trust the people who stay. Then I said the hardest thing. I was angry at you. I touched the grass near her name. I'm sorry I didn't know where to send it. When I finally stood, I took the bulletin back with me. Not because she needed proof, because I did. My father came to my apartment on a Sunday evening. He called first, at 6, as always. But this time he asked if he could visit instead of pretending everything was normal. I almost said no. Then I looked at the letters stacked on my coffee table and thought about all the years silence had already taken. He arrived with no peppermint candies, no practical reminders, no attempt to fix a sink or check my tires. He stood in my doorway, holding a paper grocery bag. "What's that?" I asked. "Your mother's mug." I went still. He pulled out the blue mug she used every morning when I was little, the one I thought had disappeared. There was a tiny chip near the handle. "I kept it," he said. "Of course you did." He looked ashamed, but he handed it to me. "I don't want to keep what belongs to you anymore." I took the mug carefully. For years, I had imagined my mother's things thrown away, erased, rejected. But here was the truth again, more complicated than comfort. My father had hidden what he could not face. He had not destroyed it. That did not make him innocent. It made him human. We sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee and poured his into an ordinary white cup. Mine went into the blue mug. It felt strange to hold it, like touching a memory that had survived without permission. "I don't know how to forgive you," I said. He nodded. "I don't expect you to." "I'm not saying I never will." "I know." "I'm saying I don't know how." He looked at me then, and for once, he did not give advice. "That's fair," he said. We sat quietly. It was the first honest silence we had ever shared. After a while, he reached into his coat pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," he said, "not to explain, just to put it somewhere outside my own head." He slid it across the table. I did not open it. "Is it an apology?" "Yes." "Then I'll read it when I'm ready." He nodded. That small nod mattered. Years ago, he had decided when I was ready for the truth. Now he let me decide. It was not enough. But it was a beginning. Over the next year, my life changed in quiet ways. I stopped saying my mother left when people asked. I said she and my father separated, and I lost her because adults made painful choices. Most people did not ask more after that. The ones who did were usually carrying their own locked boxes. I started volunteering twice a month at the Children's Reading Hour in Cincinnati. Margaret saved me a chair. The first time I read aloud, my voice shook so badly, a little boy in the front row asked if I needed water. I laughed. Then I kept reading. At home, I placed my mother's letters in a wooden box on my bookshelf. Not hidden, not displayed for everyone, just reachable. My father and I did not become suddenly close. Real life rarely repairs itself that cleanly. Some Sundays, I answered his call. Some Sundays, I let it go to voicemail. He learned not to punish me with worry when I needed distance. Once, in late spring, he came with me to the cemetery. He stood in front of my mother's grave with his hands at his sides. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Elaine, I'm sorry." The apology was too late for her to hear in the way he wanted, but I heard it. And maybe some apologies are not doors. Maybe they are only windows opened in rooms that have been closed too long. On the anniversary of the church bulletin date, I went back to my apartment and took out the old copy of Little Women. The bulletin was still inside its plastic sleeve, folded along the same tired lines. My father's words remained beneath the circled prayer request. I should have answered. I used to think that sentence belonged only to him. Now I understand it belongs to many people in many ways. My mother should have answered my fear more clearly before leaving. My father should have answered her calls. I should have answered the small voice inside me that never fully believed I had been unloved. But life does not let us return to the first question and choose better. It only lets us answer the next one with more truth. That evening, I made coffee in my mother's blue mug and opened Charlotte's Web to the note she left me. When you are ready, start with the truth that you were loved. For years, I thought love had to stay perfectly to be real. I thought if someone failed me, everything before it became a lie. But my mother loved me and still left the house. My father loved me and still hid the truth. I loved them both and still needed distance from one and grief for the other. The mug was chipped, but it held what I poured into it. So did I. I folded the bulletin one last time and placed it inside the book, not to hide it, but to keep it where someone had always meant for me to find it. I had spent half my life believing my mother's silence meant I was forgotten. But silence can be made by many hands. And when I finally opened it, my mother was still there, waiting between the pages, telling me the first true thing I should have been told. I was loved.